It is the 41st millennium. Humanity has spread across the galaxy, with its influence growing far and wide. This surely must be a time of great prosperity, boundless culture, a technological utopia. Nope, nope, and definitely nope. There is only war. Unrelenting, horrific, and all-encompassing war. This is the backdrop, of course, for Warhammer 40,000, a grim, dark future that started out as a tabletop game in the 80s, but has become a multimedia powerhouse. With its deep world building, iconic factions, and imposing characters, it was the perfect framework for video game adaptations. And since the 90s, there have been bloody loads. Real-time strategy, turn-based strategy, tactical squad games, card games, and a shooter for each and every occasion. Yet this universe, steeping in elaborate and often bonkers world design, has never had a proper role-playing game. Until now. OwlCat Games Rogue Trader will bring the CRPG format to this most bleak of futures, and it seems like the perfect fit, which makes me wonder, how on earth did it take this long to make a game like this? So, let's take a look at it, and try and work out why this is the first CRPG in the franchise's 30-year history on our screens. So, Rogue Trader, brought to us by the very capable hands of OwlCat Games. For fans of CRPGs, that name should be familiar. These guys were behind Pathfinder, Kingmaker, and Wrath of the Righteous. Warhammer fans out of the loop of role-playing games, rest assured, this lot are good at what they do. The title is set in the Coronus Expanse, a mysterious and perilous frontier that doesn't fall under Imperial jurisdiction. You're a rogue trader, a prestigious individual well-equipped, well-regarded, and well-connected. You're installed with some of the highest privileges the Imperium can offer. Similar in authority to an Imperial commander, a Space Marines chapter leader, or even an Inquisitor. Yep, you're a big deal. You're tasked with carrying out your decaying Emperor's will in this mostly unexplored region of space. But you're not the only one looking to stake a claim. The promise of treasure has been an alluring call to ambitious pirates, not to mention the servants of the gods of chaos. It's gonna be tough getting everything done with all the red tape that being a government employee comes with, right? Well, fortunately no. Given your unique status, let's just say the rules don't apply to you. When you're in Imperial space, sure, straighten up and fly right. But in the Coronus Expanse, you do what you gotta do. You are the judge, jury, and executioner. Honestly, it's a killer premise for a role-playing game. One that gives the player so much freedom and choice to be whatever character they can imagine. In fact, it's not unheard of in Warhammer lore for these rogue traders to turn rogue traitors, biting the hand that feeds and severing Imperial authority. This system is your oyster, albeit a very dangerous, very scary one. You've been equipped with your very own void ship to traverse the system, and a navigator who should keep you alive as you creep into the mysteries of the warp. You'll have your very own crew and companions fighting by your side. Some of them are fairly orthodox for a person in your position. Navy officers, sanctioned psychers, and tech priests. Some of them are a little more out of the box. Underworld queens, an agent of the Drakari Cabal, and wait, did I mention your navigator can peer into her enemy's souls? You'll be able to draw on fan-favourite factions, taking on a Marine of the Space Wolves, or a member of the Adepta Sororitas, a Sister of Battle, to build your perfect squad. With these types of games, the cast of supporting characters are just as important as you are. So the variety of choices from all walks of life, and all ends of the moral compass, is a great sign. The game systems that OwlCat have showcased seem to fit perfectly into the setting. You'll have a variety of futuristic, but sometimes quite brutish weaponry to outfit your team with. Utilising cover is key to winning firefights. And when all seems lost, you can rally your companions for one final push on death's door, which may or may not have some fatal consequences. There's a lot about this game to be excited about. For fans of the genre, for fans of Warhammer 40k, for any of you that got bitten by the Baldur's Gate 3 bug and are looking for something to play next. And a lot of this is due to the hard work of the developer and them knowing how to make these types of games interesting. But the premise, world building, interesting factions, compelling character archetypes, now that is all on 40k. Which still baffles me a bit as to why it's taken this long to make a game like this. But it's not like devs of previous Warhammer games have been twiddling their thumbs and missing opportunities. No, they've been a busy old lot the last few decades. So Warhammer, as a franchise, made its video game debut in the 90s. The fantasy variant came first, and that in itself has a long and storied history in gaming. There have been tactics games through the ages like Shadow of the Horned Rat, Mark of Chaos, and Mordheim. It lent itself well to the turn-based strategy model with Total War. It had ARPGs, horde shooters, and even dabbled in the very untouched market of sports/strategy/violence. But curiously, no classic-style role-playing games. 40k has had an equally diverse video game history. It entered the Space Crusade in '92, but it was Space Hulk a year later that really caused a stir. A tactical shooter, this captured what made the wargame experience unique. It was intricate, strategic, required wits and planning and thought. But also, it had massive guns. So when your wits failed, your strategy misfired, and all that thought was for naught, you had a massive gun to fall back on. This strategy mixed with OTT firepower approach led to a few more titles in the 90s. Final Liberation, Chaos Gate, and Rights of War. Now these will lead me to an important point, but I'm not ready to make that just yet. Just hold on to those names. The turn of the millennium brought a new age for the franchise, the THQ days, where Warhammer in video game terms was about to be split into two camps. These two camps would remain to this day. On the one hand, the strategic side, slower gameplay, commanding vast armies or small squadrons of units. This was championed by the Dawn of War series, which was, quite frankly, excellent. There was an obvious appeal here for fans of the tabletop game, because it utilises all those skills you'd need in your local games workshop. On the other hand, there was action, for those players who wanted to get closer to the world of unrelenting war, for those who wanted chainsaws and flamethrowers and bolt guns and to don their power armour and slay heretics in the name of the God Emperor. And so there were two sides of the franchise. There was Warhammer 40,000, and then there was Warhammer 40k. One was about becoming a higher-brained military commander. The other was about ripping and tearing your way through the galaxy. The THQ days were a good era for fans of Warhammer and ultra-violence, and they'd receive an offering every year. But 2011 marked the final time the publisher released a title in the franchise. From there, the doors were open, and everyone was piling in. The two diverging paths of strategy versus action kept going strong, and the volume of games increased substantially, going from 1 game a year to 3, or up to even 5 for fans to slurp up. So, an even better time for Warhammer gamers, right? Well, not exactly. The market was getting saturated, and a lot of these games felt rushed out the door. Case in point, Dawn of War 1. Magnificent game, marvellous. I could crush orcs all day long. Then, post-THQ, we have Dawn of War 3. But those two genre paths were set, and there seemed no way for a role-playing game to fit into them. Their titles sometimes had role-playing elements, and then there was Inquisitor Martyr. But let's be frank, this wasn't about role-playing, this was more about mindless carnage. This fits squarely into the action track. But it could have gone differently. Remember those 3 games I mentioned earlier? Rights of War, Chaos Gate, and Final Liberation. Those were all created by SSI, who were big names in the CRPG world. They brought Dungeons & Dragons to video games, a stepping stone that would eventually lead to Icewind Dale, Neverwinter Nights, and Baldur's Gate. On the one hand, it's easy to make the comparison between Warhammer and D&D. They're both tabletop games. They both require a touch of imagination. They're both favoured by people who prefer basements than the outside world. But these factors don't make them interchangeable. There is a crucial difference. In D&D, you're a character. You're invested in them and your immediate party members. So the crossover to computer role-playing games is self-explanatory. Warhammer, on the other hand, you're a commander, a leader of armies, a brilliant strategic tactician. Who you are behind closed doors doesn't matter, as long as you bring the thunder on the battlefield. So the obvious choice is strategy, tactics, and if you want to get into the heat of the battle, action. It all makes perfect sense. And it would be so simple if that were the end of it. But of course it isn't. Because one simple fact remains. Warhammer isn't just a strategy game. It's a deep and complex sci-fi universe with iconic characters, imposing factions, and a million billion pages of lore and backstory. Role-playing may not be its intended purpose, but it's got all the parts to make it work. And maybe you think I'm onto something. But the truth is, I'm really not. Loads of people have had this idea before. The bridge between Warhammer and tabletop role-playing has been built time and again. There's loads of campaigns, Wrath and Glory, Death Watch, Black Crusade, all geared towards getting people away from the role of a commander or a marine and giving them control of their very own character in this grim universe. And they're great! Probably the best way to get steeped in the constant misery of the 40k universe. Using one of these tried and tested tabletop games and turning that into a CRPG, now that makes sense. And that's exactly what OwlCat have done. Rogue Trader is one of the best tabletop role-playing games from the franchise. The developers are simply adapting and adding in a little bit of magic as well. So just how did it take this long? It seems a perfect fit, and the way Rogue Trader is looking, it's clearly a match made in heaven. Why didn't we get this game like a decade ago? Well, it's easy enough to think this game is long overdue, but you have to step back a bit further and see the big picture. In-depth role-playing games were all the rage once upon a time. SSI championed them with Dungeons & Dragons, but at the turn of the millennium, trends shifted. Audiences wanted more action. Role-playing games adapted by becoming more bite-sized, less wordy. They incorporated fast combat, an abundance of loot, and systems you could play without having to keep a diary of notes. Warhammer missed the boat in making an RPG in the 80s and 90s because they were just entering the market with the approach that fit their brand better. Once they got a few games under their belt, it didn't really make sense to pivot and try their hands at an RPG because fans wanted quicker games. They wanted thrills and great big guns. Warhammer was happy to provide. But a decade or so later, CRPGs started to reappear. Shadowrun Returns tested the waters in 2013, and Divinity Original Sin jumped right in a year later. After that, we got Pillars of Eternity, Torment, Tides of Numenera. OwlCat entered the fray with a Pathfinder RPG, and followed it up 3 years later. The genre was finding an audience once more, and 2023 saw the unprecedented success of Baldur's Gate 3. People called it an anomaly, but really, the signs were all there. There's an appetite once more for role-playing games. One that didn't exist when THQ were pushing out Dawn of War and Fire Warrior. So yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it took a long time for there to be a Warhammer 40k role-playing game. But really, the options were in the 80s or 90s, or now, when the genre is having a resurgence. I don't know about you, but I'm quite happy they're jumping on the genre now, rather than having the dream die in the 90s. Let's hope this is a glorious new age for the franchise, and those two roads of action and strategy open up to allow a new path of intricate, story-driven, and characteristically violent games to champion Warhammer.